300?
300. Yeah.
At least.
All right. Coming through the.
Let's get live yet.
Oh.
Yeah, it takes about 30 seconds. I can do it.
Okay. I'll give it just a second here to be sure that we're coming through okay and that I'm not talking into the void.
You guys got notifications.
Yep. All right. Can you turn off the volume and make sure you can hear me? Or can you hear me on YouTube? That's what I'm asking.
Can you hear us, YouTube?
Okay. Yep. Looks like we're good.
Okay.
All right.
How do we look? Beautiful.
Awesome. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Southfield Southfield Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a Southfield misec Tech Talk. We'd like to thank Southfield Towne Square Food Spirits for hosting. Fantastic place to eat, delicious food and burgers. Our next meeting will be here again on February 8th. Check the Discord for more information. For today, we would like to welcome Derek, who will be giving us a presentation on threat hunting and detection engineering.
Okay, let's get this party started, guys and gals. Okay, so this is a story of life, love, and logs. It's my autobiography. Threat hunting, detection engineering, and intrigue. It'll be very exciting. We're going to go over who am I, what is threat hunting, what is detection engineering, a process. I call it force multipliers when you only got a few people, and I think it might be helpful for you guys. Skills, and then maybe some resources. So who am I? Basically, this is what I've done over the last 5 years, develop a team and a process for creating and performing threat hunts and detection engineering. I'm also that center skydiver there. No, I'm just kidding about that. I've never skydived, that'd be cool. Okay, so what is threat hunting? You know, to me, when you say threat hunting, it's fundamentally asking yourself a question and finding an answer. It sounds super simple. When you break it down, to me, that's really what it is. What a threat hunt, when you define a threat hunt, you start with a prioritized topic. So a threat hunt topic we're going to be talking about, like what are you going to do? What are you going to look for? You might say ransomware. It's a little bit vague. We'll go into some topics. But let's say you want to perform threat hunting on ransomwhere. Where do you start? First thing is you probably develop a hypothesis. So a hypothesis usually follows something along the lines of, I think I can detect X technique that ransomware performs by looking for Y, or Y might be some properties of that, right? It has to be something you can test. And by test, I mean search and see if it's suspicious or malicious or things like that, right? How do you test it? Talking to you guys at dinner here, everyone kind of does different things. You're looking at code findings, you're looking at hardware, networking devices, it could be anything, right? You can threat hunt with whatever you have capable at your fingertips, right? You can do manually through log files, you can use a tool for centralized log aggregation. My experience is primarily with logs and endpoint telemetry, like Kyle stated. Why do you perform threat hunting, right? So I think it's pretty obvious. I don't know if it's obvious enough, but you want to identify malicious activity. You want to find out what's new, what are threat actors performing and looking to see that activity in your environment, and also automating that. To me, when I lump threat hunting and detection engineering together, where I come from, all detection engineers are threat hunters, because to me the last step of threat hunting is automation. Right? You perform a threat hunt, you find malicious activity, or you confirm that you do not have malicious activity, but you have a good threat hunt. Then you want to turn that into a real-time search. You might turn it into a daily report. You might turn it into a weekly report, whatever you can handle, right? So address the dynamic threat landscape. I took a look to try to find some visuals on threat hunting from threathunting.net, and pretty much the same thing, right? Create a hypothesis, you investigate it. Your hypothesis is, I think threat hunting or ransomware might, communicate through DNS tunnels or any number, or enumerate domain controllers and domain admins, right? So you investigate that with your tools and techniques, basically searching for that, however, right? And through that search, through that investigation, you develop new patterns and TTPs. Those are, what you discover and how you're gonna look for that on an ongoing basis. Form and enrich. And they call it inform and enrich. To me, that's just inform yourself and create real-time detections. So what is detection engineering? That's probably a fancy name for creating searches. It's if you look at tools like any log aggregation tool, so Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, I use Sumo Logic quite a bit, Microsoft Sentinel, any number of tools, and an endpoint, right? You can look at EDR tools, anything where you're searching through data and creating rules of some sort. So automation is the last stage. Detection engineering is the process of creating the searches that power the automation, which is a real-time search or scheduled search or report. These could be IDS signatures or any number of things. Anything that you schedule, so look for bad stuff and report. People get into the details of these things like, well, that's not real-time data. This is operational, whatever. Whatever you can support and run and investigate, that's threat hunting, that's detection engineering. I define it like this, like I said, where we come from, all detection engineers are performing threat hunts. You do lots of threat hunts that do not create real-time detections. Other people define it a little bit differently in an overlapping type of segment. So they say you might have some pure threat hunting teams, you might have some pure detection engineering teams. The threat hunting teams might pass the idea to the detection engineers. But where we come from, every detection engineer is a threat hunt, and anytime you create a detection, I think you should be doing threat hunting. So it's a little bit up for debate, and I've seen differing opinions on this. This is where we've had luck. So what I want you guys to get out of this is not necessarily be threat hunting experts. That takes time and experience and just playing around for a long time. But really, it comes down to asking yourselves questions, searching through data, and answering them. But the big thing here is a lot of articles on how to perform threat hunts, the different types of threat hunts, we're almost to categorize things. I want you to be able to create a process in your environment where you can perform threat hunts. And that might be once a week, once a month, once a quarter, once a year, right? Depending on the environment, sometimes they do once a year threat hunts, speak for compliance or things like that. Ideally, you want to do it on a continuous basis. Why should you care about a process? Early in my career, I was a cowboy and I hated processes. I never documented anything. We just kind of flew by the seat of our pants. But I've learned to get consistency, accountability, solid outcomes, scalability, repeatability. These are all things in an environment that you're going to want. Let's say you get hit by a bus, hopefully not. But you want the program to still be able to go on. So you need to have a documented process to perform these actions on a regular basis. Now, if you have any questions, I prefer you guys jump in because I'd like to talk about stuff you're interested in. So 5 years ago, it was probably early 2019. That's kind of when I started working in this capacity, and they made me document and create a process, right? So I call it the Global Threat Framework. I modified it a little bit for this talk, but you can see it. This is the actual thing on the website that we have. It's a 5-stage process, right? Each one of these is a framework. Each one of these is really an in-depth process on its own. Each item here is probably an hour-long talk on its own, so I won't be covering everything. But these are the things that you need to look at and build in your environment. So going over the stages, collect, organize, and process. Sounds easy. How do you come up with ideas? What are you going to threat hunt? What are threat hunt topics? What kind of bad stuff are you going to look for? How do you find it? You can sit there all day and come up with ideas. We did at the very beginning, had thousands and thousands of ideas in the backlog, and we're like, oh crap, what do we do next, right? So the next stage is triage. I have these bolded and highlighted, and because triage, deploying support, tuning and maintenance, are things no one talks about, and I think they're probably some of the most important things, right? So triage. How do you prioritize what's important? You create thousands and thousands of things. You can look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework for, I don't even know how many tactic tools or tactics, techniques, and procedures are there. Or if you look at rule repositories like Sigma, there's thousands and thousands of rules. How do you prioritize these things, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Third one is detector development. So like I said, every time we develop a new detection, we're also doing threat hunt. We largely base this off the threat hunting processes, when you Google and say, show me a threat hunting process, match to this pretty closely. Deploying support, right? How do you support these on an ongoing basis? That's an important one. I think doesn't get a lot of attention. And also tuning and maintenance, right? These aren't just set it and forget it, it goes on forever. I've worked for some clients that had detections running. They had people assigned to 2-3 detections, all they did. And when I go in there, I'm like, why are you even doing this? Like, why is this 3 full-time employees' job, right? Like, it could have been automated, could have been refined, it could have been 1/10 of one person's job, right? But because of tuning and maintenance, right, how can you do it more efficiently? They just never did. So we're talking about the first one, collect, organize, and process, how you come up with ideas. So I kind of modified mine, right? So the major key points, how do you leverage threat intelligence? Everyone talks about threat intelligence. What is threat intelligence? Second one, MITRE ATT&CK. So, for me, I'm looking at new log sources. I'm constantly looking at new platforms. Like, am I going to support these new Cisco Firepower, or am I going to support Okta? Start looking to see if I can detect threats there. But, I changed this to MITRE ATT&CK because one of the very first things we do is look through all the data. How can we map this to MITRE ATT&CK? So we'll talk about MITRE ATT&CK in a little bit. Research. We do general and primary research. I think all of you probably have thought at one time or another in your life, like, maybe if I look for this, or maybe we can find some threat actors or some malicious activity. I definitely encourage my team's primary research and getting those ideas back up. Internal inquiries. How many people have been asked, specific questions like, do we monitor these logs for compliance, or do we do, have they ever asked you if you defend against a particular threat actor technique? Anybody? I know Kyle has. Nobody else? And I know those guys do too. But oftentimes it's a good basis, right? Someone asks you a question, that's a good thing to take a look at and use as a threat hunt and crank out detections. What about red team assessments? Any organizations have pen tests against them? Yeah, pretty much I think these days every company does at one point or another. Out of most pen tests, there's usually findings. Those findings are usually good threat hunting topics, and usually you want to create detections or mitigate those findings. Good thing about that is you have solid true positives if they were successful. And finally, malware reverse engineering. I include this, but this is like once you have all your other ducks in a row, you can look at reports on malware and have a lot of details that you might need to create detections. But you might also want to start collecting kind of cutting edge newest malware, analyzing it, looking for behaviors, and using that as the basis for threat hunting topics. Right? So collect, organize, and process. So here we're going to focus on threat intelligence. 2 ways my team leverages threat intelligence heavily. So I work closely with a threat intelligence team. Not everyone has a threat intelligence team. So in the later section, we'll talk about kind of, I call it force multipliers. But if you don't have what I have, which a lot of people don't, what would you do? But the 2 things I get huge value from is our threat intelligence team. They're constantly combing the threat landscape, right? So they have people devoted to trolling Twitter, looking at reports, downloading. I'm just oversimplifying it, right? But I've grown to find this hugely valuable. We were talking earlier about what news sources do you look at, right? I read the news just like you guys do too. But what I found, like when Log4j popped off, everybody had a report, a blog post about Log4j. 99% of them had the exact same information, right? So you get your news thing, it's blown up with Log4j. But over time, over the period, like I learned about it, I think it was like a Friday afternoon, right? We wrote deploy detections. Over time, there was obfuscation to obfuscate detections of Log4j exploits. And that was kind of dynamic information. But to get that information, you had to have read 12 different reports. And there might be a nugget of information in reports. And over time, you would have to read tons and tons of reports of the same information, do it over and over again. So a good threat intelligence team will distill that information from solid sources and present that to you. Second one, security incidents. Has anybody ever had a security incident at their organization? All of you probably have at one time or another, to some extent, right? Every single security incident, again, is a good source for collecting a topic, right? So somebody, let's say somebody logs in to one of your employees' emails and sends a bunch of, let's say, phishing emails internally, or maybe sends BEC, so they want to change the wire information, things like that. Well, now you have solid true positives that can form the basis of a potential threat hunt, right? So you say, okay, I want to detect the malicious use of valid accounts. You take a look at that incident. Oh, you see they logged in from Africa, right? You don't ever have anybody log in from Africa. Oh, you see they created a forwarding email rule. That forwarding email rule just had question marks in it. Makes no sense. That forwarding to the RSS folder, who in the right mind uses RSS anymore, right? Like, these are things that will form your topic. I'm joking, but it actually is legitimately used, and we see false positives. But that is also something threat actors do. So that would form the basis of a potential threat hunt. Now you go back in time using your log data and say, how many people have done this? Maybe I can detect this. You say, nobody has, because nobody's ever logged in from Kamchatka or wherever, right? Like, now you can say, okay, I can create a rule. Where have people logged in? Well, everyone's logged in from North America. We don't do business anywhere else. So I'm going to start monitoring and looking for logins from somewhere else. That's the type of stuff I'm talking about and we'll get into. Next one is MITRE ATT&CK. So I covered threat intelligence, which was what we consider topic tracking and incident tracking, right? Look at the news, look at known incidents. Known incidents come from internal or external. Now, a lot of people don't have that, right? A good source is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Does everybody know the MITRE ATT&CK framework? It's a catalog of basically all commonly known threat actor tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? So we're going to use one. Somebody used Kerberos. So that was probably Kerberos was probably the last actual detection I personally created about 6 years ago or so. But this is one I know pretty well, right? So here you could. Now there's a few things to think about when you look at MITRE ATT&CK. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of techniques, right? Not all of them are used. I would even argue very small amount of them are really relevant to ongoing threat actor behaviors these days compared to the overall thing. So I'll talk about my findings, which may or may not translate to what everybody has seen, but we're going to use Kerberosing for an example, right? So you see here we have credential access. If you know nothing, let's say you know nothing about security, you say, okay, well, you can dive into MITRE ATT&CK. You can look at credential access. You start clicking into one of these, right? You say, okay, I'm going to take a look at steal or forge Kerberos tickets. MITRE ATT&CK has good reference information, and I would call it rudimentary detection information, right? So it says monitor for anomalous Kerberos activity. What does that really mean? That's what you have to figure out during the threat hunt process, but it's a good start. Here's like an overall chart. Like this is a small portion of it. Each one of these has, numerous sub techniques. So you have your work cut out for you. We're going to talk about prioritizing and what it means to you. But, I think intuitively, in the way we operate, we try to front load earlier in the attack chain, right? So you can look at initial access, right? You probably want to focus on initial access. That's also very difficult. You really want to detect, if you can detect them during the initial access, that's great. If you can't, start looking at execution, start moving the way to the right, right? Because this is, attackers don't operate in a linear fashion here, but they do kind of move and shift to the right when they're performing attacks, right? Execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, that really could all be done in one step, but, they might jump around. Credential access, discovery, lateral movement, again, they might jump around, but they tend to move to the right. When you see command and control, collection, command and control, exfiltration, and impact. Those are more endgame type activities. So if you were to look and know nothing, you probably want to start at the left, start at initial access, execution, things like that. Next one, research and general inquiries. These are just things you should keep in mind. Someone asks you a question, right? Your CEO says, I just read this news article. People are getting, they're using QR codes for phishing employees. What can we do about that, right? That's a general inquiry that you could say, okay, I'll take that. I'll use that as a threat hunting topic. I'll perform some research. I'll search for the environment. I'll document it, and maybe even create some detections. General research is really like, hey, you go to MisecCon, and you probably got your mind blown with the content that was being generated there. You come back and you say, I've got some really good ideas for detections. My team goes to conferences. They went to GERCON, they come back and they say, I saw a sweet presentation, and they developed 2 new detections. I think that's well worth it and kind of shows value. And that's what I always encourage with my team when they go out anywhere And if they come back, I can definitely say that was well worth it. Even though it's just 2 detections for, cost of a GERCON ticket, that's definitely makes sense, right? So oftentimes too, when you look at research, either you perform or it's being performed out there in the environment, those are cutting edge attacks. And cutting edge attacks will get picked up by threat actors. Sometimes it's quickly, but very often it's not, right? I was at Black Hat several years ago. I saw this Spectre Ops presentation. They were deploying a tool called Merlin. It was a very secure C2. I read an article the other day about how in the Ukraine conflict, Merlin was being leveraged to perform command and control. That was probably 3-4 years ago. I don't even know at this point. So sometimes it's picked up well after the fact, right? Not everything is right away. Threat actors leverage what works, and they don't really switch unless they need to, right? So, okay. Last one, another good one, red team test. Pretty much every organization has a red team test. So even if threat hunting, detection, and engineering is not your primary, most companies will have this. And if you're having a red team test, the goal is to fix the issue, right, through mitigating controls, or detect the issue, which and maybe even both, right? So this is a good chance to jump in there and say, okay, I'll give this a look. You have a red team report. In the report, outlines an attack, gives you details, and you can use that to go and search. And if you want to get proactive with this, adversary emulation. So I have a guy. He used to run our pen tests at our company. When we performed pen tests, wanted to move to the other side and started using his powers for good. And so we have an adversary emulation program. So he's got a roadmap of adversary tools and thinking about things like Cobalt Strike, Mimikatz. It's a little bit older. People have kind of moved on to newer stuff, still being used. But we're running those in a lab. You're studying that, and this is a good thing if you want to just learn threat hunting and start picking up on your own, right? Pretty easy to do. Fire up a low-powered VM, things like that. Run a few attacking tools on it. Look at the logs. Look at the process execution, things like that. Usually, for most popular tools, you could even Google what should I look for, and then you run it, create the detection. That's good experience. If I was hiring threat hunters for detection engineers in a more junior capacity, that's stuff I look for, right? So triage. So this is something that's pretty important, right? Now, this is a little bit boring, I think, but somewhat important. When you created all those topics, right, we went through how do you come up with its ideation, how do you come up with threat hunting topics to create detections on a later basis. Pretty much we track everything in Jira. So we got a whole workflow. Every idea that anybody ever has, anytime you read an article and you post, I don't know if you have Slack at work and someone posts an article like, hey, I just saw this cool stuff. That gets backlogged immediately if we don't have it, right? So we have a Jira ticket. Now we have a prioritization where we prioritize these a certain way, right? So, the way we high level, I'm not going to go into details of how we prioritize things, but our backlog is prioritized by things like if there's a 0-day or 1-day exploit that's out there, that's pretty much the top priority, right? Ransomware threat activity, top priority, or maybe a P0, P1. Depends on how much coverage we have for that ransomware threat activity, right? So if you're thinking about they've got a new ransomware extension for a file, I care a little bit less about that because by the time they're encrypting your files, like almost all the time when we have good visibility, we've detected it earlier than that. At that point, you're kind of screwed, right? And that's the least I care about. We still care about it and we still do it, right? But that I care about it less. Like I said, I want to front load on earlier detections, right when the malware, right when they have hands on keyboard type access. They're enumerating domain controllers, things like that. They might be moving laterally, things like that. This is going to be largely based on the systems you have in your place, but I highly suggest tracking everything you do. Even if this isn't your number one thing, this is something you do it sometimes, track it. This is good reporting. My team, on a yearly basis, we review all the work they did, right? That's what I review. I'm a manager. That's what I review for them, right? And in these tickets, when you ticket them, think about how many times you said, I think about this all the time. I saw an article a year and a half ago. What was that? I can't remember what they did. They didn't keep the references in there, right? Because that will be the basis of your topic. Now, things to tailor towards your organization, what's important to your organization, your vertical specific. We have a lot of clients ask about well, what threat actors affect us, right? Now, threat actors do target specific verticals. Ransomware actors, I don't really think 95% of anybody, or what you should care about in my mind, is ransomware threat actors, and they're indiscriminate. Even hospitals I'm seeing get owned by ransomware actors, which I thought was kind of off limits. So I don't really think, in my opinion, heavy focus. You should have a focus, but heavy focus on your vertical, not necessary. But those are things you can tailor. So actively exploited vulns, ransomware, and the things I'm seeing from hands on keyboard, it's actively exploited vulns, Citrix for the most part lately, or insert latest remote exploit for a edge device like Fortinet, Cisco, Citrix. Those are the three that come to mind immediately. And then probably the last year had. And then valid account usage, right? So what I'm seeing is tons of just logins from malicious actors. Nothing else suspicious. How do you weed that out, right? And lately, what I've been seeing people get just crushed with QR code phishing. And what we see is QR code phishing. Threat actor or the end user will take a look at that QR code. They go to it, whatever, enter their creds. As soon as they enter their creds in, we immediately see traffic out to some, like recently it was like name cheat. But in San Francisco, name cheat is used quite often. Hard to you can't just alert on that, right? But then we see logins back from that IP and immediately. And I think that's to test the creds. So malicious use of valid accounts is huge. Also, people's creds being exposed on the dark web. Those, in my mind, if you were to look at and create detections for, huge value. Okay, so you've gathered all your threat hunt topics, right? Went through all that. You documented them in Jira, which could be just like, here's an article, here's a name for it. You've prioritized these. Okay, now I'm going to start taking a look. What's in my environment? Now you start to get to the detection engineering, the actual threat hunt, right? So ultimately, this is simple. You create a search, investigate the results, refine the search, right? When people talk about threat hunting, they make it sound extremely complicated. Can be. The actual techniques used can be complicated, right? But we're going to break it down. So the phases, first phase is research, right? You got to understand what you're looking for. Then once you understand what you're looking for, you create a prototype. Prototype is literally just a query, right? Splunk query, sumo query, endpoint query, network, PCAP search, whatever you want. Create a prototype, right? Sweep your environment, and we'll talk about this in detail. Analyze the results, investigate, and I would suggest a peer review, right? Ideally, you're not the only one doing this. In many organizations, that may be true. But when it comes to searching and investigating, everybody's got specialties. Like my team is kind of like the A team. All of them have come from random places. They're all awesome, but it's like everybody working together really makes an awesome team. So I made up this process for researching called CUD. Actually, this was just made up by a PowerPoint designer, but it looked cool. Crack open the backlog ticket, right? Understand the threat topic by reading the associate. So understand it. In this case, we're going to talk about curb roasting, right? Curb roasting is well defined by ADsecurity.org. He's one of the, I would say, godfathers of AD security for a long time. If you want to learn about detecting threats in Active Directory, go to adsecurity.org, as well as Azure AD, I think, these days. Develop a hypothesis, right? I believe I can detect curb roasting by, whatever you learned during your research. So I believe I can detect curb roasting by searching for the presence of RC4 encryption in a ticket request, right? We'll talk about that in a second. Then decide how to test the hypothesis. How do you test that hypothesis? You do the search, look for bad stuff, right? What's the best source of data for identifying the activities? These are the main questions you're going to ask yourself. Where am I going to see this activity? So I'm looking for curb roasting. That's AD security, right? You're looking at Windows AD logs, so pretty much the Windows event log. What properties of that data, right? So during the research, and I'll show this in a second, you'll see that there's specific properties in these Windows events that indicate RC4 encryption. RC4 encryption can be cracked offline. It's weak. Many organizations, you'll still see this quite often, which means that if you were ever to intercept their request, you can crack it offline. So here's an example, right? So based on the research, you develop an initial query. Here's an example. This is pulled from AD security. You have the Windows event 4769 is requesting a service. So you've authenticated, you want to access a SQL server or anything else, right? You're going to take a look at the service name. And now if you're doing that, to identify ones where requests have been made using RC4 encryption, you go down to additional information and you see OX17. OX17 indicates RC4. So that means I can run a tool, I can make that request. The response gets back, totally legitimate, there's nothing malicious about that. The response comes back will be in RC4. Now that encrypted portion can then be extracted, taken offline, and correct, and now you have creds to this account, which would be SQL ADS, blah, 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 dash SVC. But you want to look for that in your environment. Most environments that I've seen have this quite often. It's more of a legacy thing, right? You've upgraded AD over time. You've got some probably legacy applications or services. This is seen very often, right? And then in that post, they talk about the ticket options. I forget what this ticket option means. Kind of irrelevant. Basically, you see these three properties, 4769. Oh, you can't see my mouse, I've been pointing to stuff. 4769, OX17, and OX408, 10,000, right? Those are indicative of a potentially suspicious request. Now you want to analyze, investigate, and peer review, right? This is a portion. So you've created the prototype. Now you have a search. So I was talking about right here. Okay. So that's a prototype, right? You create a search in your sim of choice, whatever you want to do. You can grep for this, right? Whatever you want to do. And then what are you going to do with it? You're going to analyze the results. You're going to take a look. I typically recommend taking a look back as far back as you can. If you've been collecting logs and you have a centralized log database, you should be able to go back 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year. I'd say several months is good, right? So build a query, right? So you're going to say, show me all the events that are Windows security log. Event ID equals 4769, right? Ticket options equals OX17 or what was that? Encryption type is OX17. Ticket options equals the ticket options that are shown there. Take a look, and now you're gonna run that search. That search is going to bring back individual events that indicate somebody has made a ticket request and it's using RC4 encryption. Now, that only tells you one thing. It tells you that somebody made a request using RC4 encryption. Is that suspicious or not, right? So you have to investigate those results. This is really the hard part. Investigating those results kind of is what relies on your experience. But what I find is you get a systematic approach. It doesn't always need to be rely on experience. The stuff we look at is all new. We're looking at new data sources, new logs, new environments. You don't that's going to be helpful, but you don't necessarily need to have that experience. What a really good investigator does, at least from my experience, is ask themselves questions, right? So you say, okay, I see this. How do I find this is malicious? What would you do if you see a user, you see Dan Fall made a request for a ticket and it's using RC4 encryption? Like, what are some strategies, right? First thing I always tell new, like especially new people, if you don't have a clue, because they get stonewalled, they're like, I don't know what to do next. Throw up your hands. Well, start asking yourself who, what, where, when, why, and how. So you start answering those, you'll start moving along and populating that. And answering those questions is just further searches, right? So taking a look at this event, who did it, right? Well, I see Joe User did it. Who did it? What happened? They made that request. That request only indicates that they made it. It doesn't necessarily indicate it's suspicious. When did it happen? Okay, I see that, right? But the next logical question, okay, you see one instance. The next question I ask myself is, I try to build compounding evidence, right? Compounding evidence to support that this is malicious, or compounding evidence to support this is benign. This is kind of where you want to take a look. And so how would you do that? To me, I would take a look. Because you have a history, right? You have a year's worth of log data. Take a look back. So it's easy. Count by hour, right? It's usually a typical operator you can do in Splunk, any major thing. Count by hour for Joe User, where ticket encryption type is OX17, and give yourself a line chart, right? Is it steady? Do you see him make the same request on a weekly basis, daily basis, hourly basis? Or do you see nothing for 6 months and all of a sudden you see 1, right? Or 17. That's the type of stuff you need to take a look. And that's the when, right? When did this happen? And when, what's the history of it? So why did he do it? That might be indicated by the service name, right? So typically you can take a look at the user, what type of user it is, maybe investigate that user. Does this user access SQL ADS, whatever, quite often? But the encryption type is usually AES. Now all of a sudden it's OX17, which would be insecure. And what else does he do? Do you see more in using that insecure encryption type with other service accounts? That would indicate maybe that'd be supporting evidence to indicate maybe it's compromised, right? Because all of a sudden, no history. All of a sudden, he makes a request for 20 service accounts because he still has to crack it offline. Passwords could be hard to crack, and those services could be of varying types of administration or administrative privileges, right? So those are the type of things you want to look at. And then how do you do it? Well, that's tough from logs, but you might pivot to an endpoint, look at the process and execution. Was it a suspicious process? Did he execute PowerShell to do this? Well, if he did, maybe not. That it may or may not be malicious, right? But then you look at his history. Does he have a history of PowerShell? Is this new? Taking a look at that PowerShell code on the command line. Was it obfuscated? Was it encoded? When you decode it, is there any suspicious module names like Mimikatz? Like usually there's definite giveaways to things being suspicious. So you've investigated, right? This could be a full hour. How do you investigate? Investigation theory. We'll talk about that in a second. Respond to the findings, right? You have found something malicious because you found compounding evidence to support high probability or confirm that this is malicious. Now what do? Follow your normal IR plan. Maybe talk to your boss, or maybe report to this email. You should have some sort of process, whether it's formal or informal. Document the entire thing, right? So you performed an investigation. What did you do, right? If you're going to have a program, you want to document the ins and outs of everything you did. So this could be repeated if you were to create a detection from this. Now, we spend tons of time doing this, and if you're to create a program, I highly suggest it. Every detection or class of detections, we might not write a single individual guide for every single detection that exists. If you can repeat work, definitely do that. But every detection is associated with investigative guidelines. Document that. And then also peer review the detection results, right? Because I find so many times, especially for things like, oh, this client's getting brute force nonstop. And so that they seem to relate that to something else that happened. Well, when you look at a longer timeline, that's just background radiation to internet exposed services that are constantly brute force. It actually means nothing, right? Therefore, usernames do not exist in the environment, and it's probably just botnet behavior. Getting second opinions and confirming or helping you is something that you should do if it's possible. We follow kind of what they call detection as codes. We try to do like peer, I don't know, I've never been a developer, but I hear about peer coding, things like that. We do the same with our detections. Document and deploy. So like I said, this is hugely overlooked. This is where a lot of time should be spent if you're not doing it. You should have a detection and threat notes coming out of that third process, or the third stage of the process. Document the detection, document the reference material, document the investigation steps and all necessary information to respond to findings in the future. Basically, when we created this process, we sat down and I said, what's everything you wish you had that you never did have when you first started as an analyst, right? I would stand in front of a SIM console and they said, find stuff, Derek. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I find out this event? I had to ask people, but over time, you start to learn things. Don't make every single person learn from scratch, right? Having that as a good starting point usually is not the end point. Also, create investigative tooling as necessary. So you create a detection, let's say in a SIM, and an endpoint product or network product, you probably have investigative tooling, and log products you typically do not. Or you have some generic ones, right? Create the dashboards to perform this quickly, right? Create filters. So you input the username, input the computer name, boom, payout, comes out all the information. You can do an investigation right there. You do not need to have every analyst manually figure out what searches, right? It takes a very high level professional to do that from scratch. And even for them, it'll be time consuming, right? So I suggest over documenting, right? If you want this to continue and be able to be scalable and be able to be handled by more junior level people. So most ops are not staffed with 10-year IR investigators, right? They're staffed with college grads, entry level, and there's usually levels, right, as you move up. Ensure there's a record of any changes to documentation. Something a lot of people don't think about. I've seen our detections change, either the guides, detection guides, or the detections themselves. And you can spend a day, I've spent days trying to figure this out, only to realize that there's some crazy edge case where somebody modified the detection in a way that did not make sense, and I was not expecting that, right? You want to have a record of every change. That's why I use Jira and Confluence. It's easy. There's a history of everything. You don't even have to worry about that. Most tools like that probably are very similar. I call these runbooks, playbooks, use cases, right? If you want to learn, look online, search use case, right? Cybersecurity use cases. There's usually various formats you can use for the basis. I literally just sat there and I'm like, what would I want if I was starting off? So, base stuff, what is being detected, right? Hugely important. What are you even detecting? Why it's important? Like, that's a good one. What's the impact? What am I looking for? How the detection works, how to investigate, right? This is required for long-term success of a SOC, right? Any single person should be able to leave at any time, and your SOC is unaffected, right? If you have this type of stuff, you should be able to handle those type of things. Finally, report and curate, right? So you've created detections, you've documented, you've deployed them, right? Environments change over time. I'll give you an example. I had a number of detections, right? We ran in AWS. You run tools like Pacu. Pacu has a number of malicious modules that threat actor might perform. In those is a number of enumeration modules for enumerating services and things you have access to. What I found across many clients early on, about 6 years ago, not many people would trigger those alerts. Now, almost every single one constantly does. And it's very difficult to detect enumeration activity. So what I'm saying is environments change over time, and you need to monitor for that. Because otherwise you're going to be spamming your SOC analysts. And if you think about it, every detection costs money, right? Either costs money in resources, either costs money in people's time spent, and that's valuable, right? Because those people should be spending time on worthwhile things. Nobody wants to be looking at spam alerts. And then that also will decrease your efficacy over time, because if you have analysts looking at crappy alerts 99.9999% of the time, when that one comes up, they're likely not going to see it. So you want to make sure that they know how to handle these things. So report and curate. So we track every possible metrics we can possibly do. So we're looking at alerts per month, per signature, alert outcomes per signature. Alert outcome per signature for us is like, did we email the client? What was it categorized, right? How long? We're looking at investigation time, right? So when the case was open, when the case is closed, because your documentation might support that. If it takes them 35 minutes before an investigation, maybe you can update your investigative tooling, reduce that to 7, right? Over time, that'll pay for itself. So we use schedule reporting. So we have intense reporting on everything we do. One thing to keep in mind, it's very easy to be like, we will not accept detections unless they have a 99.9% efficacy rate. That does not really work well. Every detection, the impact changes, right? So think about a detection who maybe 1 out of 100 is actually identify something bad. That one detection takes 3 seconds to investigate. Should you keep that? I would say maybe yes. It depends on your environment, right? And what everything you have. What if you gotta look at the impact? Detecting that impact could prevent a hands-on ransomware actor, and that might cost $5 million. And that takes you, 1 out of 100 is successful, and it takes 3 seconds. You gotta figure out your risk reward in those situations. What I'm saying is use your expertise and don't just go solely on numbers. Some people really just want to go, oh, we're only doing this. Screw it all, right? So, okay, getting the force multipliers. Many people and many organizations do not have a threat intelligence team. They don't have a whole detection engineering and threat hunting team. What do you do in those situations, right? I would recommend taking a look at things like a threat detection marketplace, right? These things exist out there. They cost money, but they're probably relatively cheap compared to demand to FTE. So things like SOC Prime, Cyber Security, these places will do a lot of that work for you, right? They're emailing me all the time saying, we just came out with 6 detections for this new CVE. This Atlassian CVE, right? That came out, whatever. We got detections for Citrix. We got, whatever. They're doing all the threat intelligence. They're doing the prioritization for you. They're reviewing all the documentation and reports out there, trying to understand what's important to most environments. They know these things, and they're developing detection. Now, these detections, are pretty good usually. They typically don't have access to thousands of customers to really test these things, but it's 95, 90% there, right? You can take that, put it in your environment, tune it, and deploy it, right? So something to think about. It's a good starting point for threat hunt topics and texts. I don't use any of them. I can't really speak for them. They look cool. At some point when you got 1,000 customers, paying for these things on a per customer basis isn't economical. So we have a team that does that. My team is really probably a competitor to things like SOC Prime or cybersecurity or whatever, however many. A service provider, right? If you look at a service provider to do the MDR, then you're only fielding the alerts. You got one FTE or a half FTE, right? You're only going to be able to take alerts that they've investigated, distill down, and send to you, right? They should be able to articulate this process to you. How do they do threat hunting, detection engineering, and stay on top of new things? Another thing is leveraging tools with strong detections, right? The tools vary substantially. Some tools are only about you creating the detections. Some tools, you look at CrowdStrike, very good detection engineering, right? You do not have to worry as much. I shouldn't say at all, but you don't have to worry as much. Keep in mind these these tools, they're geared towards serving, hundreds of millions of users. So things that might be higher false positive rate across that many people might not be in your environment, but they might not alert on it, right? Those are things to think about. And then leverage repositories and tools, right? Sigma, everyone talks about Sigma, right? Sigma's awesome. Again, Sigma I find in the same veins like threat detection marketplaces. Great place to start. Sigma covers a lot of the major attacks out there. It's a vendor agnostic, but analytic capability is lacking in my mind. So you cannot do advanced analytics as far as I know. They're starting to get there with rudimentary analytics and combinations of activity. There's some cool tools like Uncoder.ai, that's a SOC Prime tool. And then just really any vendor repository, right? You can go to Splunk, find tons of it. You can look at ArcSight, any number of these tools. A lot of times they publish the names and signatures, and oftentimes that's all you need to really understand what's this detection doing. To take a look, should you deploy that? Talk about skills, right? The skills I see, technical acumen. You have a foundational technical understanding of environments. That, to me, is network, operating systems, and cloud, right? Having a decent, most of my people have all of those. They vary substantially from one to the other, so I've got specialists in different technologies. I have network people, cloud people, whatever. But have a decent understanding. I know none of these good. I know most of them pretty well, or okay, I would say. Next one's investigation theory, right? And honestly, this is just not getting stonewalled when you have a problem, asking yourself questions and working through it. How do I figure out what's normal? How do I figure out what's malicious? Again, and if you get stuck, literally write out who, what, where, when, why, and how. Start documenting that. Finally, is data analysis. I feel like this is the most underrated cybersecurity skill in existence. I find very rarely do people study any type of data analysis. And almost every field in data security requires data analytics in some capacity, right? You can do sick stuff with Excel or whatever, right? You can start working in Python. Even most of the sims these days, you can do pretty advanced things like frequency analysis and things like that. You can do pretty awesome stuff, right? I would really suggest, this is one, like, no matter what you do, vulnerability analysis, any number of things, you can leverage data analysis very well. In conclusion, create a process, collect, organize, and process your threat topics, triage, come up with priorities, perform the threat hunt detections, right? Practice this at home if you've never done it, document and deploy, and then also maintain. Here's some references, right? So Splunk has a really good framework for threat hunting. Some of these things I'm not a huge fan. They put things in a box. So like Peak Framework, awesome. But they're like, well, we got the machine assisted threat hunting. Then we got the hypothesis-driven threat hunting. For me, I want to use any data at my disposal, any technique at my disposal, any way I can identify it. So I don't really try to like categorize things, but that'll give you a great outline. InfoSec Nirvana, right? 12 years ago, this is what got me into SIM use cases. This is super old, good source for documenting use cases. Detection engineering.net. I pulled a couple images from there, so I included it. Threat-hunting.net. Practical guide for threat hunting. That was a good one. And the last one's the FII stack use case framework. Highly overcomplicated use case framework, but it uses Excel, tracks everything you can imagine with your use cases, and we'll give you really good stuff and it'll look cool to manage it. So something to think about, at least use all or in part. Questions? Nothing? I was talking real quick, but
How much of, once you actually find a detection, how much of your stuff usually involves attribution, if any at all?
very little. Only, and one thing I'll say is my team, so we create the detections, we do the threat hunt. So when we find findings, that goes to our SOC. Our SOC will operationalize and do that. So we form the investigation, document it, pass it on to the SOC. And our threat intelligence team also does any attribution. We don't care all that much, but there are certain circumstances where we absolutely have. And I can't really talk about that right now, but yeah. So I don't find it's valuable. And usually, a lot of times we'll have like a 90% chance, like based on the news, things like that. We'll understand not using locations because locations come from, it's almost random across the planet when we see these. So it's very difficult to really use that as a sole. But there's, you know, some very low percentage you absolutely are very high confidence. No.
What's your favorite metrics to keep in?
I'm going to go to
No, you.
People I know how to picture very impressive on LinkedIn profile. And you know, you were mentioning that data analysis was underutilized. So I was wondering, Sora data analysis course you've done, were they helpful actually, or just you got?
That was the basis of everything I do today.
Really?
So he's referring to, I took, early on in my career, right, I was the log man. And I was like, I got all these logs, I gotta do something with them. So I started taking Coursera courses from Johns Hopkins University, right? It took about, I took a ton. It was like 10 of them over the course of 5 years. And then I took 3 or 4 on machine learning, right? I literally used that early in my career. That's what started my whole career off. I used that because I was in PowerShell was coming up. And I created 100, I remember this bit vividly. I created 140 rules to detect malicious PowerShell. Then someone came out with invoke obfuscation, which bypasses every single 140 of those rules. Then I started creating rules for detecting obfuscation of it. And then obfuscation isn't always, right? Encoded commands, legitimately used, but also very often not. Super prone to high positive. So using my newfound data science knowledge, I was talking to an associate of mine at my office, and he's like, this would be a great binary classification algorithm. And I literally just had a class on machine learning and binary classification. And I was like, I can do this. And so what we did, I was like, we look at these. Within 3 seconds, I know it's suspicious. I don't know how to code PowerShell. I know that when I see all special characters and I see these replace statements here and there, codes this long in the command line, that's not any admin would never do that, right? Encoded commands, yeah, that's done. But that's easy. You decode that, then take a look. There's also, we would do, so what we did is use the cosine similarity to determine how similar is this code to a set of known labeled good ones. That'd give you a score right there, detect your obfuscation. Then anything that wasn't obfuscated typically had a number of terms. So we use term frequency analysis. So what is there a presence of term of certain terms? Yes or no? 300 to 400 of them. That gets updated a little bit. And that combination, right? So we had so from that we started pulling samples off Twitter everywhere. Had probably 10 to 15,000 samples of malicious power code. We generated a bunch of them automatically with us, and so we trained the model. The model came out awesome. Detected one of the times where we were able to determine a nation-state adversary, and that was one of the only times in my life where we could almost positively say this was attributed to a specific threat actor. And I was like, I was just early in my career, and they were like, Derek, I want you to do more of that. That was probably the highlight of my entire career. I'll never do anything that cool for the rest of my life. But those things are still used today with my team, right? We do tons of frequency analysis, right? We do behavioral modeling. We go, you can take a look at an event, it happens. We go back in time and we say, is this normal for this user or not? That's pretty simple. It's SQL. It's just I forget what you call it. It's just a query within a query, right? So you look for this activity, then you also look, is this normal for that user? Or you baseline over time and look for, deviations from the mean, right? 2, 3, 4 standard deviations. In cybersecurity, you see substantial outliers when things like that happen. You take a look at password spraying, for example. Password spraying is indicative of a high quantity of distinct users failing in a time period. That's something that's easily modeled in most organizations. And you take a look, and so you see huge deviations. And your computer 1, 2, 3 users. Maybe it's your username, maybe you have an admin username, maybe there's another admin. You really shouldn't have 50 or 100 failing with the source IP of your machine, right? And that's modeled over time. Easy to pick out in those circumstances. Many times it's not. I can't say it's always easy. But to be successful, in my experience, I've done adversarial emulation early in my career. We had to do password guessing on about 1,500, 2,000 accounts. I'd be successful about 4, 5, 6, 7 of those accounts, right? You see ABCDFG 14, right, or whatever. They had iterated over 14 quarters, things like that. So you need more than 50. You need several hundred to likely have a chance of guessing a password in some environment. But I would say frequency analysis, hugely valuable. Basic slicing and dicing, SQL, hugely valuable and applicable to most systems. That alone will get you pretty far, right? So, machine learning, we had a really good use case. I have not found awesome use cases, and I have yet to. I would argue that my binary classification of PowerShell is one of the best ones in existence, and I would argue that. Now, I don't know. It's probably not true because I'm not no freaking genius. But in terms of the use case and its applicability, I think it's hugely valuable. So, great question.
I was just saying, what's your favorite metric KPI for this program?
So for our metrics, I don't track my people based on how many they do because every detection is different. I have a researcher that can take a week, and responding to TI stuff can take 2 hours, right? So if I track them based on how much they do, they're going to game the system, right? Because they create detections, could be split up into 4 detections, right? You're going to pump your numbers up. So we track people on projects. I give them projects. I know how long a project should take, and they'll project it, and things like that. We track signatures based on how many hits. So we have a few things. How many basically alerts are generated? How many and we also do other response. So what's the output? Emails to our clients and the category of those. We also track case open time, right? So those are the major things we look at because if for us, we've got thousands and thousands of clients. Every alert actually costs a substantial amount of money, right? So we have to reduce that wherever we can. And that's why I have a whole team dedicated. I have 4 people dedicated to maintaining our rule set for everything and monitoring those things. Okay. Anything else, team? Squad?
Alerts on any time.
What was that?
You peaked early.
I know. That's what they're like. We want to do more of that. I'm like, I got nothing.
I'm done.
No, we did more. We did more awesome stuff. But I would say next thing was create this process. And I never thought I'd want to be a manager in my life. It's one of those things I want to say. I don't want to be a manager. Creating this team, a machine where they're cranking out awesome stuff. It's pretty awesome. So.
Not a manager, you're a leader.
Not a leader. Yes. No, I'm not a boss.
Yeah.
I'm a leader. Yeah. So. Okay. Cool. They're probably waiting for us to go.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming out. As a reminder, our next meeting will be here at Southfield Towne Square Food Spirits on February 8th. Look forward to seeing everybody there.
Well, if you want to see I did the last presentation, last time I was here, I did the PowerShell presentation. That was many years ago in this room. So that should be in the
archive.
Yeah, I think it's called PowerShell classification.
Oh, obfuscation.
Yes, that was, yeah, you were there.
He knows.
Yeah.